mieliśmy swoje podwórze, swój kościół.
Były napisy dla psów i Polaków wstęp zbroniony.
Myśmy nie wychodzili poza ten nasz teren, bo Niemcy bili.
Atmosfera była bardzo podniecona, bali się ludzie.
Ta agresja tych flag, zrozumiałem, że coś się dzieje, czego jeszcze nie jestem świadomy, a co się zbliża.
Locul în care ne aflăm acum este peninsula Westerplatte, dar aceasta nu este o simplă peninsulă lângă orașul Gdansk. Aici este locul unde, pe data de 1 septembrie 1939, o navă germană pe nume Schleswig-Holstein a ajuns la ora 4:45 și a deschis focul asupra acestei peninsule, iar acesta a fost primul atac al celui de-al Doilea Război Mondial. Aici, în această peninsulă, v-am mai spus că orașul Gdansk nu apărea în custodia niciunei țări, nici a Germaniei, nici a Poloniei, dar era de interes maxim, pentru că aici este și un port și în ziua de astăzi este foarte utilizat și foarte important. Este un port strategic, maritim și tocmai din cauza acestui fapt, polonezii profitau, făcând comerț și negoți pe mare, dar orașul era populat în majoritate de nemți. Iar acest lucru i-a înfuriat atât de rău pe nemți încât au provocat începutul celui de-al Doilea Război Mondial. Iar în dimineața aceea, aproximativ 180 de persoane, că nu le putem spune soldați pentru că orașul Gdansk nu avea armată pe atunci, au rezistat eroic timp de 7 zile atacului furibund al nemților. Astăzi este un loc foarte liniștit. Se aude briza mării, se aud valurile care se izbesc de țărm, se aude vântul care adie ușor, dar dacă stai să analizezi ce se întâmplă în jur, liniștea, gardurile delimitate cu sârmă ghimpată, aici poți înțelege că a fost începutul unei mari tragedii globale. Cel de-al Doilea Război Mondial este una dintre cele mai sângeroase lupte din istoria omenirii. Și aici a început. Repet, pe 1 septembrie 1939, la ora 4:45, în Gdansk. Bine ați venit în Westerplatte, locul care a schimbat omenirea.
Tension had been rising for numerous years after the First World War, and this city right here, the free city of Danzig, now known as Gdansk, was one of the territories taken from Germany as part of the Treaty of Versailles. This coincided with other punishments, such as reparation payments and restrictions on the size of the German army. The consequence being growing bitterness and resentment among the German people. Combined with political instability and the Great Depression. This fed the Nazi Party's rise to power. At 4:48 a.m., the Germans launched their attack on Westerplatte, with a battleship beginning to fire upon the small military outpost. It was this very invasion which led the British and French to declare war on Germany just 2 days later. And I'm sure you know the destruction which followed over the next 6 years of what would be the deadliest war in history. And here we are, the place where extreme...
Dacă v-am tot spus că aici în Westerplatte s-a deschis prima oară focul în celul de-al doilea război mondial, focul care a deschis efectiv, care a pornit al doilea război mondial, pe atunci asta este clădirea care a fost prima dată bombardată și o să aveți imaginile cu ea și din exterior și din interior. Vedeți că scrie și aici, se intră pe propriul risc. Această clădire este serios avariată și nu a fost refăcută pentru că se dorește se dorește a rămâne dovada vie a faptului că această clădire a fost prima bombardată și totodată aici s-au apărat cei aproximativ 180 de soldați. Ați văzut imaginile unde aveau încăperi, unde aveau nici nu știu cum să le zic, unde era cazarma în care se adăposteau. În spatele meu se află monumentul de la Westerplatte. Această statuie, construcție, monument a fost ridicată în cinstea soldaților polonezi care au rezistat aici în fața armatei germane timp de 7 zile. Nu reprezintă o victorie militară, cum reprezintă majoritatea monumentelor ridicate în cinstea unor armate sau în cinstea unor soldați, ci reprezintă curajul, sacrificiul și rezistența soldaților polonezi. Acest monument a fost ridicat în anul 1966. Înălțimea sa totală este de aproximativ 25 de metri, deși, dacă stau să mă uit, pare mai mic, dar mă rog, ei știu mai bine aceste măsurători. Este amplasat aici pentru că fix aici, în locul acesta, pe acest deal, pe care am urcat și noi pentru că suntem la o înălțime destul de mare, aici a fost lupta cea intensă de cucerire a Gdanskului. Este construit din blocuri masive de granit.
Nasz dom przy koszarach, tam była osobna kaplica dla nas, kościół. Mieliśmy tam, już mówiłam, szkołę, przedszkole, dom zabaw i cała ta dzielnica była taka otoczona wysokim płotem. Także myśmy na ulicę nie wychodzili sami. A jak wychodziłam, to po mleko tam do jakiejś pani chodziłam, pamiętam niedaleko, która miała krowę i to było blisko. Ale Niemcy, Niemki, dzieci tak jak ja, miała wtedy 8 lat, podleciała do mnie, mi mleko wylała, pieniądze zabrała, pobiła. No już nas napadali, na przykład mojego brata, jak wyszliśmy za teren, to na przykład brata Niemcy rozebrali do majtek, także już nas nie wypuszczali, chodziliśmy wszędzie z rodzicami.
Aici suntem în fața poștei poloneze. În ziua de astăzi este o simplă poștă, dar pe 1 septembrie 1939, momentul în care a început al doilea război mondial, angajații acestei poște s-au transformat din simpli angajați, din simpli oameni, în soldați de nevoie. Pentru că războiul nu a început doar pe front și nu s-a ținut doar în port, acolo unde a început, sau pe străzile orașului, ci a continuat pe străzile obișnuite ale orașului, în birouri și în clădiri de genul acesta. Iar angajații poștei au decis să se apere și au rezistat în fața armatei germane în jur de 7 ore, ei fiind, după cum am spus, niște simpli angajați, nu soldați antrenați.
Of September 1939, and the Polish post office in the free city of Danzig is under siege. Surrounded by SA police units and Nazi sympathizers, the Germans demand the building's surrender. The outnumbered Polish staff inside make the brave decision to defy the invaders and refuse submission. In the opening hours of the Second World War, as the German army steamrolled its way into Poland and the Luftwaffe bombed whole cities into rubble, a small battle would unfold at the Danzig Polish post office. For over 15 hours, the Poles would hold out against impossible odds, spitting in the eye of the Nazi war machine, hoping for the best, but in the end, receiving the worst. The Polish post office, where this battle would unfold, was opened in 1920, being converted from an old German military hospital. After Germany's defeat in the Great War, territory was carved up by the victorious Allies. West Prussia was given to the new Polish Republic, creating the narrow corridor that separated East Prussia from Germany. This was partially done as a slight against the fallen empire, but also to allow the Poles access to the Baltic Sea, giving the young nation greater economic freedom. Major trade would pass through the port of the city of Danzig. The Polish government had wanted to annex the city into its new territory, but with an overwhelming German population who demanded their right to self-determination, the fledgling League of Nations instead struck a compromise and transformed Danzig into an independent city-state. Poland was given a unique number of rights in the city over foreign affairs and economic trade, but also included creating its own post office. So in 1920, the hospital and its surrounding structures were converted, with Building 1 on Helveliusplatz becoming the primary building in 1930. It operated as a legitimate post office throughout its tenure. With over 100 employees, it delivered mail and parcels to the German and Polish population. But the office also acted as an intelligence gathering station. Informants would send vital information to military intelligence, keeping them up to date on events unfolding in the Free City. Things were largely uneventful throughout the 1920s, but the Poles became increasingly concerned in 1933, when Germany left behind its broken love affair with Weimar republicanism and instead embraced something much more aggressively militaristic. The rise of the Nazi regime saw a wave of anti-Polish rhetoric, and by 1930, Hitler's plans to restore German honor at any cost had become painfully transparent. Another war was on the horizon, and Polish High Command knew that the post office in Danzig would be one of the first battlegrounds. So in April, they dispatched Sub-Lieutenant Konrad Gdanski to organize its defense. Gdanski took to his new charge like a professional soldier, identifying weak spots, reinforcing key locations such as the entrance, and removing obstacles that would obscure lines of sight. The post office became a training camp overnight, with the employees being drilled daily on firearm usage, hand-to-hand combat, securing and holding key positions, as well as fallback points should the enemy secure a foothold in the building. A chain of command was created, with Alfons Flisikowski, one of the civilian workers, being placed second in command. Two other postmen, Jan Mikon and Joseph Wozik, would act as sub-lieutenants. Gdanski's work was made easier by the fact that a number of the men belonged to the Polish Riflemen's Association. This ensured that some of them already had basic training. Reports were sent back between Army intelligence and the post office on the progress. In August, Polish command were able to send 10 Army reservists to bolster the building's security and aid in the training. Everything was running like clockwork, as it should in a post office. But that well-run machine would soon be smashed apart. On the 1st of September 1939, the Germans made their move. In the early morning, the building's power was cut. 40 minutes later, the battleship, Schleswig-Holstein, positioned in the Danzig harbour, opened fire on the Polish garrison at Westerplatte. The men there would endure their own heroic last stand in the coming hours. Gdansk and his postman acted quickly. Weapons were handed out, mostly small firearms, and 3 Browning WZ 1928 machine guns, along with a number of grenades that had been smuggled into the city. Securing the building, they took up defensive positions. The Danzig police soon arrived, surrounding the building. Local SA units, along with SS Heimwehr Danzig, acted as reinforcements, bolstering the German numbers with 3 ADGZ armoured cars. Gauleiter Albert Forster, head of the local Nazi party, arrived with them. Members of the local press were hot on Forster's heels to report the Nazi victory. It would be a quick battle, over in minutes, and make for a winning headline. Once all the men were in position, Police Captain Willy Bethke gave the order to attack. Under a haze of suppressive fire, the Germans attempted to storm the entrance, forcing their way into the building. The defenders quickly drove them back, killing 2 while injuring 7 others. A second assault was attempted on the rear work office, breaking through the courtyard wall. Gdansk led his men in repelling the Germans, using the grenades to drive them into a confused retreat. Unfortunately, as Gdansk drove back a police unit, he was caught in the blast of his own grenade. He died instantly. Full command of the defense now fell on the shoulders of Alfons Fliskowski. Of the post office's 100 employees, only 56 were present when the Germans attacked. This included the 10 reservists, but also the building's caretaker, his wife, and their 10-year-old daughter, Erwina. Despite their numerical disadvantage, Fliskowski kept morale up by reassuring his men that help would come. The original plan had been to hold out for 6 hours, by which time the Polish-Pomeranian army would have time to mobilize and capture Danzig. While hopes were high inside, frustrations were of equal measure outside. The Germans were furious with the Polish resistance. Captain Bethke suggested using high explosives to bring the building down, but was overruled by Forster. The Gauleiter wanted his prize intact. At 11 a.m., Wehrmacht reinforcements arrived, bringing a 105mm howitzer and 2 other artillery pieces. A renewed attack saw the building racked by heavy fire as the enraged Germans attempted another breakthrough, but the Poles stalled them, then forced them back once again. After this insult, Bethke ordered one of the mortars that were engaged at Westerplatte to rain hell on the post office, an idea that quickly turned into a farce as the machine's faulty sights saw heavy rounds drop all over the square, endangering the Germans more than the besieged Poles. After this debacle, Forster gave a 2-hour ceasefire, once again demanding the postmen to surrender. It had now been 10 hours since the start of the attack, and despite the declining morale, the Polish defenders refused. Fliskowski used the reprieve to check the wounded and reinforce the defences, but the Germans were playing for time. A team of sappers had started digging from below street level and had reached the building's foundation. They placed a heavy charge explosive, and when they were clear, detonated it. The blast brought down one of the walls and sent shockwaves through the post office. In the confusion, the Germans had massed for a final assault. With a blast from the artillery pieces, the combined units stormed forward and surged into the building. Under such overwhelming fire, the Poles fell back to their last holdout in the basement. Now at their lowest and realizing that there would be no rescue, some considered surrendering, but most were willing to hold out. The German attack, however, never came. Instead, the Poles noticed the growing acrid stench of gasoline that began to fill the room. The Germans had no intention of a final, costly assault. They wanted this farce over with quickly. Captain Bethke had ordered the Danzig Fire Brigade to pump gasoline into the office's basement. Once done, they ignited the liquid. The Poles were forced to flee back upstairs as the flames filled the room. 3 men were burned alive, while others suffered major injuries. Sitting in the crumbling ruin of the post office that they had fought so hard to defend, the postman decided to surrender. As sections of the building burned, the group was led out by Jan Mikon, holding a white rag on the end of a stick. The Germans, thirsty for blood, shot him regardless. A second group was led out by Joseph Wosik. He too fell under the Teutonic fury, being immolated with a flamethrower. 6 of the men escaped capture, with 4 evading the Germans for the remainder of the war. The rest were rounded up and imprisoned under the eye of the Gestapo, the feared Nazi secret police. The wounded were stuffed into an overcrowded hospital, where 6 of them would succumb to their wounds, including little Erwina, who had been badly burned during the escape. A sham trial was quickly convened, and the Poles were naturally found guilty, being charged as illegal combatants and thus not protected by the Geneva Convention. On October the 5th, they were executed by an SS firing squad, their bodies dumped into a mass grave, covered over, and forgotten. Though the war would roll on into an inevitable German defeat, the memory of the last stand at the Polish post office would not be forgotten. Their heroic actions would take their place amongst the pantheon of brave last stands, such as the Battle of Wisna or the Warsaw Uprising, coming to symbolize the Polish people's refusal to submit to an invading enemy. The postman's 15-hour stand against overwhelming odds turned them into national heroes for the young republic. The statue now stands dedicated to their brave sacrifice, just outside the very building they gave their lives to defend, forever remembered for their courage. The brave few who stood against many and lost, but in their own way now stand undefeated.
Dla Polaków szczególnie trudny okres zaczął się gdzieś tak w latach 36., kiedy Hitler już doszedł do władzy, kiedy przysłał Gauleitera do Gdańska. To wtedy byliśmy narażeni nie tylko na wyzwiska, ale na pobicia. Maszerował akurat oddział Hitlerjugend, tej młodzieży niemieckiej, z tymi bębenkami. Ja się nie zorientowałem, po prostu zaskoczyli mnie. I wszyscy, którzy przychodzili, byli zobowiązani podnosić rękę, tak jak witali się hitlerowcy. Heil Hitler! No ja oczywiście tego nie zrobiłem. To jedno uderzył mnie w twarz, kopnął, ale ja byłem na tyle sprytny, że zdążyłem uciec i skryłem się w bramie.
W 1939 roku ojciec wysłał mnie na obóz, właśnie skończyłem szkołę powszechną, zdałem do gimnazjum i ojciec wysłał mnie na obóz straży przedniej takiej organizacji młodzieżowej do Kartus. No i kiedy wracaliśmy z powrotem, przejeżdżaliśmy przez Gdańsk i wtedy zobaczyłem po raz pierwszy historię, w której niestety chcący, niechcący będę musiał wziąć udział. Mianowicie przejechaliśmy wzdłuż ulicy, która była widoczna, gdzie stały rzędem maszty, a na nich flagi hitlerowskie. Pierwszy raz widziałem taki obraz. To jest dziwne, dlatego że właściwie nie było żadnej manifestacji na tych ulicach, ani nic takiego się nie wydarzało. Ale ta, że tak powiem, ta agresja tych flag, ich ilość, że to jest wielkie miasto, Gdańsk, zrobiła na mnie wielkie wrażenie i zrozumiałem, że coś tutaj, coś się dzieje, czego jeszcze nie jestem świadomy, a co, że tak powiem, a co się zbliża.
Ne aflăm în Gdansk, într-un loc cu o încărcătură istorică uriașă. Muzeul celui de-al Doilea Război Mondial nu este unul dintre cele mai mari muzee istorice din Europa, ci unul dintre cele mai moderne. Astăzi, Gdansk nu fuge de trecutul său. Acest muzeu nu este despre arme și strategii, ci despre oameni. E despre ce se întâmplă atunci când frica, ura și ambiția scapă de sub control. Clădirea pe care o vedeți este simbolică. Partea vizibilă deasupra solului reprezintă doar prezentul, iar cea mai mare parte a muzeului se află sub pământ, acolo unde începe adevărata poveste a istoriei celui de-al Doilea Război Mondial. Acel moment când te plimbi în muzeul celui de-al Doilea Război Mondial și după ce dai colțul, efectiv, te trezești în Gdansk al anului 1939.